In the evolution of cities, we've come a long ways very fast.
We're 20, 30 minutes away from anywhere you want to be in LA County.
I've worked with a number of prominent cities, and I can assure you that we have the best mayor and city council and executive team in the country.
Amy Trask, it's kind of surreal sitting here with you. We've been friends for over 25 years. And
we met when we were 7, right?
Yes, we met when we were 7. And just hearing Amy Trask, former CEO of the Raiders, I don't think fully captures the magnitude of that job and your role, pioneering role. Tell me a little bit about, because as we like to say, there was no line at the restroom at those owners' meetings.
and that's exactly what we did say. And that's a very kind, very gracious introduction. Only the part about how long we have known one another is a little bit frightening.
It's a little jarring.
I'm sure there's people here that might not have been born when we met in our respective careers. Not sure exactly what you want to know, but there was no line for the ladies' room, and I used to joke about that. There'd be a break in the NFL owners' meetings, and all the men would run, and there'd be a line for the men's room, and I just walked right into the ladies' room because there was no one there.
You were the only woman in the room, right?
When I started my career for a number of years, right.
Yeah. So let's go back to growing up in Los Angeles, and how did this get started, and was the passion for football always there?
Grew up in Los Angeles, as Sam just said, and I fell in love with the game of football when I was in junior high. Started junior high, went to my first ever football game. It was a junior high school game, and I just fell in love with the game. Because, yes, we all know about the speed and the power and the strength of the players, but it's a very cerebral game. It's a game of matchups. How does your pass protection work against our pass rush and vice versa? Can your corners cover our receivers and vice versa? Can you play man? And I worked for Al Davis for almost 3 decades, so you're playing man. How do your linebackers match with our running backs and vice versa? I did not grow up in a family of tremendous football fans. I mean, sure, they watched the Super Bowl every year. There was either a Super Bowl party my parents hosted or one we all went to. But I was the one in the family that on Sunday I said, I want to stay home and watch football. And they all looked at me like, did we take the wrong one home from the hospital? Because no one else was staying home with me to watch football. For the holidays, in fact, for every year for the holidays, when I got old enough to be buying gifts for my dad, and even when I was young enough that my mom was giving me the money to buy gifts for my dad, I'd buy him tickets to a Rams game.
Wow.
So that I got to go to the Rams game with my dad with the tickets I bought him for the holidays.
Well, we made news here then that you were originally a Rams fan.
You know, fair enough to say, I really wasn't. I was a football fan. The Rams were the team here. I wasn't against the Rams. I just didn't have a particular affinity for any team until I went up to Northern California for college. I was at Berkeley. The Raiders were actually right down the road, and I fell in love with the Raiders.
Now, there are millions of kids who fall in love with football, millions of girls who fall in love with football. That's still not making the jump from a fan and somebody who loves it to CEO of the Raiders with Al Davis there. How'd that happen?
Well, as I said, I fell in love with the Raiders when I was at Cal Berkeley. Everything about the team, you would watch teams play on the road, and all the teams, the guys would get off the team bus in their sport coats with their briefcase, and then you'd watch the Raiders get off the bus for a road game, and they're just like tumbling out in their sweats, like nobody had slept the night before, and ragtag. And what really resonated with me was Al didn't care if you were labeled a behavior problem. He didn't care if other teams refused to sign you because you were, quote, a behavior problem. Well, I was labeled a behavior problem in kindergarten. And that, look at your face. You're like, yeah, I get that. And that label stayed with me through 12th grade. Some people would say it's still an appropriate label. So I love the fact that this is an organization that gave a chance to people other organizations would not give a chance. Al gave people second chances and sometimes third and fourth chances. And I love that about the team. And I love the whole rough and tumble, ragtag, everything. So when I came back home to Los Angeles for grad school, was the same year, coincidentally, that the team ultimately moved from Oakland to Los Angeles. Al had tried to move the team a few years earlier, but the court had ordered the team back as part of the whole litigation. The year I graduated from Cal and moved back home to moved back to Los Angeles, the team came down. I used to go to Raider games at the LA Coliseum, and here I am, first-year law student, and I hear everybody talking about these things called internships, and I knew what an internship was, and externships, and I had no idea what the difference was. So I picked up the phone and I called the organization and I said, I'd like to be an intern. That's how it started.
Wow. And then from there, what was your first meeting with Al Davis?
And do you know who took the call for that? They said, hold on, we'll put you through to someone. Al Locasal.
Al Locasal.
And he said, what does an intern do? And I said, well, I'll work for you.
So you created the internship?
Yeah, I was their first intern. And I said, I'll work for you, and this is what I'll do, and I'll get, maybe I'll get school credit. And he's like, okay, come on down. Huh. And I think my first interaction with Al was very shortly after I became an intern. Because as a law student, I was doing a lot of things in the organization, but interacting with a team lawyer. And when Al would have meetings with him, I went into the meetings.
Wow. And that was right here in El Segundo.
Right. I mean, boy, it was a trip down memory lane. And by the way, this is not our father's El Segundo anymore. It's very different than it used to be.
That was a small middle school, I believe?
It was middle or elementary. I don't remember which. I think middle school.
There was something about that renegade Raider thing that really resonated in Los Angeles. I mean, you got a foothold right away in Los Angeles, didn't you?
Yeah. Now, I wasn't, the team came down, I think the first season was 82. I joined the team as an intern in 83. So.
Were you there for a Super Bowl?
I was an intern, not really.
Anyway, so moving forward, the working relationship with Al Davis, this legend, living legend, what was that like for you?
Well, the biggest misconception about Al is that he wouldn't tolerate disagreement or he wouldn't tolerate anyone who disagreed with him. Because if that were the case, I would have been fired about 2 weeks into my job. 2 weeks into my job, maybe 2.5, I'm sitting in the office with a coworker, and Al walks in and rips into this guy like I could only imagine a velociraptor would rip into flesh. And as I listened to him talking, I realized he was wrong. So, Sam, I don't have a dainty voice under any circumstances, but he was yelling, and to be heard, I yelled, and I said, excuse me, really loudly. I said firmly, I guess I would say firmly and loudly and clearly. I said, excuse me, you're wrong. And I will forever remember the look on his face when his head spun around towards me. It was like Linda Blair in The Exorcist, only none of the green stuff. And he looked at me like, what did you just say? And I said, look, you're wrong. And I went on to explain to him, and it was heated. He's yelling, I'm yelling now. And I said, look, if the facts on which you were basing your conclusion were accurate, if you were relying on accurate information, accurate facts, accurate data, that would be a fair conclusion. But you are basing your conclusion on inaccurate information. He yelled, and I yelled, and he yelled. I didn't learn until much, much later that people had gathered in the hallway of the middle school. All the staff is listening to this, girl who'd been there about 2 weeks, yelling with, one woman even brought boxes because she figured I'd have to pack up my stuff. Well, after a pretty long argument, he said, oh, okay, I gotcha, I got it. And we went on to have a conversation. And I think that set the basis of our relationship because over the course of almost 30 years, I disagreed with him more than I agreed with him. And we argued and we fought, and I did my best to convince him when I thought he was wrong. But I also recognized and respected that at the end of the day, so to speak, he owned the business. I didn't. So when he made a decision, even if I disagreed with it, I had to do my best to make it into the best decision it could be.
Diversity or lack of diversity is a hot topic in the league right now. But if you look at Al Davis had a pretty remarkable track record, whether it's Tom Flores, Art Shell, you. He was pretty amazing. Tell me about that.
Well, what I say to people, because look, there are going to be people watching this that love the Raiders. There are going to be people watching this that hate the Raiders, people who loved Al, people who couldn't stand Al. But if we're all being intellectually honest, team loyalty aside, he did the right thing. Al hired without regard to race, gender, ethnicity, or any other individuality, which has no bearing whatsoever on whether one can do a job. And I talk about this a lot, and people will say to me, Amy, you talk a lot so glowingly of Al and the fact that he hired Tom Flores and you and Art Shell. And I point out, name someone else to me in the NFL in the early 80s who's hiring a girl. I owe my career to the fact that he understood race and gender and those individualities don't have any impact on whether one can do a job.
What would have happened had the Raiders wound up in L.A., back in L.A. with the Rams in the same stadium, and it weren't the Chargers? I mean, would that be a...
Oh, you mean in this most
In this
recent cycle?
iteration,
Okay, I thought you
yes.
were talking way, way, way back when in '95. You know, I thought the way the league went about it was very interesting because they awarded the franchise to, they awarded the Los Angeles market, if you will, to the Ram franchise, and Stan did a magnificent job building that stadium. Think what you may have anything regarding the NFL, that building is magnificent. And what the league did was said, okay, Chargers, we're giving you X amount of time to decide whether you want to opt in, and if you don't opt in within that period of time, the Raiders have the right to opt in. And I said at that moment to anyone with whom I was speaking, well, of course the Chargers are going to opt in. Because if the league positioned the Chargers that if they didn't opt in, they knew the Raiders were, and now you've got 3 teams within roughly 120 miles, and that's rough.
Mm-hmm. They'd be hemmed in. Were you surprised that the Raiders ultimately, or any team, wound up in Las Vegas?
Not surprised the Raiders did, but surprised as to the entire change of view of the NFL as to Vegas. Look, how many years ago was it that they said no to a player, I think it was Tony Romo, who was going to go to a fantasy convention there? Oh, I'll tell you something about a change in the league's view on this. We were the first team to put fantasy information on our website. You couldn't bet, you couldn't play fantasy, you couldn't gamble, but we put data on the website. You know, we knew people were playing fantasy football, so we put data about rosters and no betting, no gambling, no money involved. Within 2 minutes of that going live on Raiders.com, the phone at my desk rings. It's my private line. I pick it up. It's an executive from the league office who says 3 words to me. No, maybe it was 4 words. Amy, take it down. So the league has emerged from Amy, take it down, to now there's a franchise in Las Vegas and you know, there's gambling partners and sponsors, and it's just a different world these days. I mean, look, gambling, you know, there's gambling in Casablanca. Gambling has gone on forever. Now it's simply above the table.
How is it going to ultimately change the league? We're always seeing the leading edge of this, the amount of money that's involved in this, but what are the down the line effects?
Well, when I think of this, my law degree comes into play, my legal education, because there's an expression in the law that you have to not only avoid impropriety, but the appearance of impropriety. And sometimes the appearance of an impropriety can be almost, if not as problematic as the impropriety, well, maybe not as problematic as impropriety, but pretty darn close. Here's an example. Raider player, Friday night, you know Fridays, the team, if it's a Sunday home game, the teams get off early on Fridays. A lot of players go out with their significant others. So let's say you have a player, significant other, they're going to go on a date to a really, really nice restaurant that happens to be in a casino. Player's doing nothing wrong. Fan stops the player and says, hey, can I take my picture with you? And the player does what every team in the league hopes the player will do and says, sure, let's take a picture. Puts his arm around the fan, they take a selfie or someone takes a picture, and right behind them are the words sports book. Now that player has done absolutely nothing wrong and in fact has done everything right by being gracious to that fan. And yet if that player misses a tackle on Sunday or fumbles the ball on Sunday, are people going to be quick to say, oh, but wait, I saw him in front of the sports book? And again, I want to emphasize, in my example, that player's done everything right. So the league is going to have to make sure to avoid not only improprieties, but the appearance of improprieties.
Well, then if you look at the accusations of Brian Flores, that really, the idea that he might be paid to tank games really cuts to the heart of the league's most important asset, which is its credibility and the idea that everybody's playing on a level playing field.
That's obviously a big, big allegation. And there's a number of possibilities. He may have said it and meant it. We don't know. He may have said it in what he intended to be a joking, jocular fashion, like, maybe I didn't really mean it, like, hey, maybe I'll pay you, but, kind of silly and funny, never intending to do it. Fair enough, Brian may have interpreted it. Look, people misinterpret humor all the time. I'm not saying it was humor. I don't know if it was humor, but you could posit a hypothetical where it was accurate and he made the offer and it was sincere, and that's a big problem. You could posit the hypothetical that he said it in jocular fashion, but it was interpreted in serious fashion. There'll be a lot of discovery related to that. There's going to be a lot of legal billable hours associated with this.
I mean, your law school degree, the fact that you're a lawyer, has really come into play in your career quite a bit, hasn't it? I mean, you've both in your career as an executive, but also in your TV career.
And it's a great education. I mean, I was one of those millions of kids, maybe not millions, that goes to law school never, ever, ever intending to practice law. I just wanted the education for a couple reasons. Again, I came out of college in the out of law school in the mid-'80s. I thought as a woman going into business, it would give me that little extra bit of gravitas, but I also loved the education.
You passed through the door and held the door open for a lot of women. What's the report card on the league in terms of that level of diversity?
Well, I guess I have a very long perspective on this because, again, when I walked in that door of my first league owners meeting, I was the only woman, and I was the only woman there for a number of years. And I should say, there were other women who would come and go, but those were the wives of team owners or the daughters of team owners. But I was the only non-related. And really, in many meetings, I was the only woman. But then when the social events occurred after, there were wives and there were other women at the social events. But over the course of my career, some terrific, terrific women. It started opening. Jeannie Bonk with the Chargers, Hannah Gordon with the 49ers. So I have seen progress. People ask me when I see progress, am I excited? Well, what's going to really be exciting is when it's no longer newsworthy. Mm-hmm. Sure, it's exciting when we see progress, whether it's related to race or gender or any type of diversity. But what's really going to be exciting is when it's no longer newsworthy because it's de rigueur.
Mm-hmm. We're seeing some coaching, women in coaching now, and your thoughts on that?
I'm laughing because I can't tell you how many times I would be watching practice. We called it film, even though it really wasn't film anymore. But I'd be watching practice film or game tape with Al, and I would start my sentence with, if I was defensive coordinator, and before I got another word out, you're not. If I was defensive coordinator, you're not. But in all sincerity, it's terrific to see. And, we saw a female official in last year's Super Bowl. And umpteen people said to me, well, Aim, they're just doing that to be politically correct. No, they're not. Let me tell you something, and you know this, so let me tell you something. The last thing the league wants is for officiating in the Super Bowl to be a story. The league wants the best officials on the field. The league wants officiating to be beyond question. So the thought that the league would put anyone on the field that the league did not feel was best suited to officiate in that game is just silly. She was on the field. Sarah was on the field because she deserved to be on the field.
You were in all those meetings for all those years, the 2 per club meetings, even some 1 per club meetings. Is this how the league wanted to return to Los Angeles in terms of when you look now, host a championship game, Super Bowl in this stadium with the Hollywood Park complex growing?
Yes, in one regard, which I will share, but with a footnote. So the stadium is magnificent, and this is the vision the league always had for Los Angeles, which was a breathtaking, magnificent stadium which would host not only regular season games, but Super Bowls and perhaps other events down the road. I don't think it ever occurred to anyone at the time the Rams moved to St. Louis and Al moved the Raiders back to Oakland. I don't think it occurred to anyone that it would take as long as it did. How many meetings did you attend where you raised your hand at that press conference after the meeting and asked, much more eruditely than this and much more politely, but when's it happening?
Right. Yeah, I know. It's amazing.
By the way, I don't know if eruditely is a word. I think I just made that up.
We'll take it.
Let's put it in
our
the
style
urban
book.
Put it in the Urban Dictionary.
Tell me about your use of Twitter, because you really have effectively used this to build an audience and really have repartee with your
Twitter
tweets,
Village,
with
with
your
Twitter-
tweets.
Twitter Village.
And you say hello to them and people love you.
Okay, when I joined CBS Sports, someone in the PR department / social media department said, would you like to go on Twitter? I said, no, no, no. I was like Khrushchev. Niet, niet, niet. Google it, kids. But I was like, no, not a chance. I'm never doing it. Never, ever, 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 ever. And then I went on Twitter, and I'm now pretty sure it was invented for me. And I say that teasingly. I know it wasn't. I love it. When I think about the fact that we can have conversations with people around the world in real time at no cost and engage in discussion, how great is that? I'm interacting with people all over. And we have a rule in our Twitter Village. Go ahead and disagree, but disagree agreeably. We exchange thoughts in a reasoned and reasonable manner, and we disagree agreeably when we disagree. Now, look, there have been times up until recently when I did something that really annoyed people. I could count on one hand or maybe 1.5 hands the number of times someone was really nasty. And when I see a mean reply, I'll respond if I have a moment to do so. If I see it, I will always reply and say, hey, you know what? Go ahead and disagree with me, but you don't have to be mean. And I mean, I know I sound like a third grader. Don't be mean. But I'll write back and I'll say, go ahead and disagree with me. But you don't need to be mean. You don't need to be nasty. And in all but extremely few instances, the person writes back and says, you know what? You're right. You're absolutely right. I can tell you I strongly disagree with you, and I don't need to be a jerk when I do it. Well, think if we could get the whole world to do that. Think if everyone on this planet, when disagreeing with one another, did so agreeably, and if we listen to one another, and if we exchange thoughts in a reasoned and reasonable manner. And Twitter lets us do that.
It's a little bit, harkens back to that conversation in Al's office, where in the end he said, you know, you're probably right.
Yeah.
But
Go
it
ahead
could
and
get
disagree.
heated.
And share your thoughts and share them strongly, but you don't need to be nasty and you don't need to call people names. I have no issue with people telling me I think you're wrong, but you don't need to say I think you're wrong and then fill it with expletives. But you know, you're sitting in you're in your house or on the beach or in a coffee shop or in your car, not driving, you're not typing when you're driving, and you're interacting with people across the globe. How great is that?
Yeah. You talk about being at the beach. You
I
were traveling across the country every week for CBS Sports, and now you're at the beach for your job. Tell me how that worked out.
Well, thank you, CBS Sports Network, gracious, generous. I'm now participating every week in our show, but I'm doing it from a satellite location in Los Angeles. So instead of the show ending at 9 o'clock California time and me getting home at 9:15 at night, the show ends at 9 o'clock California time, and I'm home at 9:15 a.m. And the first thing I do is I walk to the beach and grab a cup of coffee at the surf shack there.
Wow, what a great life. That's great. Did you ever think you were going to be on the media side of this?
Well, for a while in college, I thought I would want to be a journalist. I really thought for a while I was going to be a journalist, but never on camera, you know, kind of the facts, give me the facts. Not only did I never think I would go on camera, I affirmatively declared to everybody I would never go on camera. It's the scariest thing I've ever done in my life. I mean, think about that, Sam. I worked for Al for almost 30 years. I stood up at one per club owners meetings and argued with people. The only thing I've ever done that has scared me from a business standpoint is being on camera. And when I was first approached about going on TV, I said no. I mean, just as strongly as I said no to Twitter. Are we kind of seeing that maybe my no's don't last? But I said, no, I'm not doing it, I'm not doing it. And I was with a group of friends one evening, and we were talking about what I was going to choose to do next. I had just given notice to the Raiders a few weeks earlier. And I said, well, I have this opportunity to go on TV, but I'm not doing it. I'm never going to be on camera. And I'm going on and on and on about my insecurities. And I'm sharing the reasons I'm not going to be on camera. And I'm happy to share them with you, but the punchline of this is, a woman said to me in a very quiet voice, she just said, let it go. And I thought, that just resonated with me. And being on camera is the scariest, hardest thing I've ever done. My first year on CBS Sports, Bart Scott, former linebacker, was on the show. He held my hand under the desk until every commercial break ended, and then he would put my hand on the desk, and after the commercial, he'd take my hand, after the segment, he'd take my hand again. I told the producer that year, Sean Robbins, week 1, I said, I am so scared, I'm gonna throw up all over myself on camera. And his response was, oh my gosh, we'll get so many YouTube views for that.
Oh, that's great. When you look at this Super Bowl matchup, what do you think the determining factors are going to be?
Pass rush, pass protection. I mean, Joe Burrow was sacked a lot this season, and by a lot, I'm going to go Julia Roberts. Big, huge. He was sacked a lot in the divisional playoff game, sacked 9 times. Now, look, there's a lot of different reasons for those sacks. Some were pass protection, some were play calling, some was his his decision making. But he was sacked 9 times in that game. Championship game, only once. But Aaron Donald and that Rams defense, they have to be licking their chops. And conversely, pass protection for the Bengals has to be thinking, whatever we have to do, whatever, leave a tight end in, leave 2 tight ends in, leave a back end to chip, whatever we have to do, we have to protect Joe. I think, and by the way, I think most games come down to the line of scrimmage. And I think this game will come down to pass rush versus pass protection. And by the way, someone's got to cover Jamar Chase.
Yes.
Oh, by the way, just that.
By the way.
By the way.
I was thinking the last Super Bowl in Southern California, now we know the last Super Bowl in LA was 93, but the last Super Bowl in Southern California was yours in San Diego.
Thanks, Sam.
Yeah, sorry.
And
what
I'm
did you
out.
learn about the Super Bowl that maybe surprised you back then?
Well, and I will put a disclaimer in front of this. They beat us, we lost. This is not offered by way of an excuse. They beat us fair and square, we lost the game. But it was the only time the league, or the only time to my knowledge, certainly the only time in the modern era, at least that I can recall, that the league did not have a week off between the championship game and the Super Bowl. So instead of a 2-week break, it was championship game, Super Bowl was the next week. So now whenever I hear coaches talking about the fact, well, the first week we let the players worry about tickets and worry about plane flights for their family, and then the second week we hunker in to focus on the game. We didn't have that first week. And people would say to me, well, Aim, equal footing, because neither did the Buccaneers. Yeah, but we were playing our former head coach. Yeah. So he had the insight as to our, 2 weeks, maybe we were able to change our play calls. 2 weeks, maybe we were able to make some adjustments. Again, they beat us fair and square, but I don't think the league should ever go back to missing that 1 week prior to the final week before. You need the 2 weeks.
You referenced John Gruden. He's had a life-changing, difficult year and everything. What do you remember about hiring John Gruden? And
I'm so glad you asked that. Kids use an expression these days, humble brag. There's no such thing, because that's an oxymoron, right? If you're bragging, you're not humble. But that's the only coaching search in which I was ever involved in almost 30 years. So one time in almost 30 years, Al involved me in a coaching search, and he had me meet every single candidate. And after I met them all, Al called me into his office and said, which one would you hire? And I said, without any hesitation, Bill Belichick.
Wow.
And he went on to hire John, which at the time was a fine decision, worked out well for the years that he was there. And I never thought that story would become public. And then we had a press conference up in that auditorium you know well. And at the press conference, Al said, Amy told me to hire Belichick. And I was really touched that he did that, because he did not have to admit publicly. And now it's there for anyone who wants to Google, Amy told me to hire Bill Belichick. And from that point on, I kind of just glowed every time he would say to me, kid, you know how to hire a coach.
Yeah, because at the time, Bill Belichick was not a hot commodity at all.
Nope. But oh boy,
surprising he got another.
Smart. Or as they say in Boston, wicked smart.
Wicked smart. What about Tom Brady and his, obviously, now retiring? First of all, you think he'll ever come back? Do you think this is, I know he's 45 years old, I know but he's left the door slightly cracked.
He closed that door, and within a week, he cracked that door back open. I wouldn't be surprised if he does or if he doesn't. He's been very, very clear that he wants to spend more time with family. He's been clear about all that he's missed by being with family. And I do, and this is not Tom specific, I do push back a little bit or bristle a little bit when I hear professional athletes saying, I'm missing so much time with my family. Fair enough, you are. But so are the men and women who are deployed overseas in the armed forces and are sent off at a moment's notice to someplace in the world where their lives are in danger and they're not earning what players are earning. So does the mom or the dad who's working 3 jobs to support a family. So yes, I understand Tom and all players are sacrificing weekends with family. But you know what? You're sacrificing weekends with family and you're being paid a lot of money to do so. That person who is all of a sudden deployed to a hot zone in the world, they're not being paid what you're paid and they're missing time with family. The single mom or single dad who's working 3 jobs, they're missing time with family too.
We've talked all this time and we haven't even mentioned basketball.
Oh.
Tell me about your basketball life.
The Big Three, founded by Ice Cube and Jeff Quantinitz, the two of them longtime business partners. Clyde Drexler is the commissioner. I serve on the board, and we were really just going. We had our mojo going, and then like many businesses, we slammed into COVID. We had to shut down for COVID. We came out of COVID, and now we're looking to see what the future will determine. But boy, oh boy, and there's a segue here as well. It is a basketball league comprised of former NBA and now European basketball players. But talk about diversity. When we made Clyde the commissioner, and he had been coaching, we needed a new coach. So I remember saying to Cube and Jeff and Clyde, what about Nancy Lieberman? And not one of them raised her gender as an issue. And we hired Nancy, and in her first season, she won the championship, and all the players and fellow coaches voted Nancy Coach of the Year. Well, the next year, the league expanded, and we hired Lisa Leslie, who in her first year won the championship and was voted Coach of the Year. And my point in all of this is there is not one player or coach in the Big Three who thinks of them any differently than any other coach. Oh, other than they think of them as championship-winning coaches. And I remember after Nancy led her team to the championship in her first year, we were at the post-championship press conference, and every question was preceded with, what's it like to have a woman coaching you? What's it like to have? And one of our players grabbed the microphone and said, stop starting every question with woman coach. She's the head coach. And I mean, my heart just popped.
Wow. What's next for you?
You know what the fun is? To be determined. I love what I'm doing with CBS Sports. I do think a lot about this, Sam. There are a lot of problems in this world. I mean, tremendous problems. We could sit here all day and not list all the problems, whether they're political issues or environmental issues or, poverty issues. And I think, do I want to keep talking about man versus zone? Or, do I want to maybe look at doing some other things? And so there may be other things to follow.
Well, thank you very much, Amy Trask. It's been terrific. Great to reconnect here.
I hope this is still being recorded because I want everyone to know that it popped my heart when you invited me to do this. It is an honor and a privilege and a pleasure, as has been working with you for all these years.
Thanks, Amy.